This episode of Legends, the series, is brought to you by these fine companies.
Do you answer to Waco Willie or Wide Open?
I'll answer to anything anymore. I don't care.
What was it like growing up in a positive energy household?
Well, it's, I think it was a huge advantage, obviously. If you're raised to never give mental recognition the possibility of defeat, it's like, I was on a phone call this week with one of my ex-colleagues, Ryan Haas, that used to work for me here at General, and he's got a company called Forward Sports Marketing now, and he was telling the guys, he says, well, we're working on this sponsorship deal, and he goes, well, I remember Billy telling me, he goes, the best way to get a yes is just sit there until you get rid of all the no's. Until you get rid of all the no's, you're going to get a yes, and that's kind of the way I've lived, is just try to get rid of all the no's.
As a child, were you told no?
Well, my dad was German. I was told no more than anybody you've ever seen. Our dad did not spoil us at all. I mean, he's woke me up at midnight before to go fix the yard that I did incorrectly because the flower beds had to be trimmed correctly. That's the kind of dad he was.
Never knew you were a gardener.
Well, I will tell you this, I made myself a promise that no matter how much money I had, I'd never do my yard again when I grow up, and I never have. I mean, he was that, hard ass, I guess you'd call it.
But that in a good way prepared you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, it was with love, but it definitely was. If you didn't do the yard correctly that day when he got home from working 18 hours a day, and he went and checked, and the flower beds weren't done correctly, you would get up right then and do them.
So, a 16-year-old kid just wakes up one morning and says, Dad, I think I want to drive a funny car. How did that happen?
Well, I drove go-karts, from when I was 9, and so I'd been all over the state, and I'd won the state championship and raced IKF and all these things, and my folks got divorced, and so I wasn't old enough to drive to take my go-kart to the racetrack. And a gentleman friend of mine named Grover Rogers, who drove a funny car for Bobby Stakely Brothers Chevrolet, out of Waco, Texas, and he would take me to the races. And I had multiple carts. I had outlaw carts, and I had carts for the national events, and they did it by age and cubic inches, cc's actually, and so he would drive my bigger carts at the national events, and I would drive the cart, but he would pick me up. That way he got a free go-kart ride out of the deal, so to speak. And so knowing that my folks were divorced and my two brothers were already out of the house, he asked me, hey, you want to go to the races, drag races this weekend? And so he became like a big brother, and so that's how I started going to drag races. Is he would take me, and I learned how to work on the car and everything. And then I don't know why he did it. And one day he asked me if I want to learn how to drive. Well, sure. I mean, I've gone 121 in a go-kart, at Dallas Motor Speedway in an enduro kart, and we normally race sprint karts. But so my first run ever was actually at an airport in McGregor, Texas, in that car, and then when I got my license at 16, it was actually at Fort Hood Air Base because they raced on the weekends on one of the runways, and they set up temporary lights and everything. And that's where I got my license. And so I was just working on the car and wouldn't get to drive hardly ever, and he crashed one of my go-karts really bad and broke his hand and had to put it in this big banjo thing, and it was going to be like 6 months, and we had all these races booked And we raced basically in a 5-state area at the time because I was in high school. And so I became the full-time driver. And so that's kind of how I ended up being the driver.
But this 19-year-old from Waco, Texas has a legion of followers right now as they move to B stage. McCulloch breaks. Billy Meyer will go on to win this one easily as McCulloch broke his car at the line, and there is a 6.19 elapsed time, 6 and 1900 seconds, at a top speed of 218.44 miles an hour, and it's a disheartened crew of Ed McCulloch as they shake their heads and go down and pick up that car. And here he is, a young man to watch, on the move, 19-year-old Billy Meyer.
So you make a big splash. It's not like you made a small splash in drag racing. You come out there while you're 15, 16 years old in a funny car. I bet that had to make all the old veterans say, here's a kid, he's got all the best equipment, and he's just a kid.
Well, we didn't necessarily have the best equipment to start with, but that's back when CKC, was racing, and the Brand X and all the local Texas cars, and we were racing all around. And then when I got out of high school, Grover drove one more time, and he drove at the Tulsa race back when they had the big money race in Tulsa. And then I bought him out, and then I went on tour. So my first race by myself was at the Fall Nationals in Bristol, and the second race was the Manufacturers Funny Car Championship in '72.
Is that the time you tried to French kiss Linda Vaughn?
Well, she claims I did, but we're still really close friends, so I guess it didn't bother her. But I was 18, and I was having fun. Obviously, that winning that race at 18 is like winning the Masters, to me. It's the biggest funny car race in history, an independent race, and so it was pretty fun.
I believe that the money that he's gotten and things he's done has come from his family, and I don't think he's ever even had a job, as far as I know.
So what you're saying, you think then that money can buy a competitive race car?
Absolutely, yeah. That's what it really takes is a lot of money. And it can do that. So
well, if he can outspend you, then he can outride you.
Well, that's possible. Yeah. He might be better than me. I'm not really sure. Who knows? But I really doubt it.
You were always going to have one to say, "Oh, this is a spoiled rich kid running off his daddy's money." How did you deal with that?
I didn't care what they thought. I mean, if you knew what really happened and how much help I really got from my family, you would think about that. I mean, I've been in hotels where I had to sneak out at night because my credit card didn't work anymore. My family didn't give me money. I would say at points in my life, I remember my mom sending me a couple $100 on Western Union before, 2 or 3 times. But I mean, when I ended up, setting the world record at Indy in '74, Waterbed Fred worked for me. And we had to go eat at the hotel because I had to eat on the credit card because we didn't have any cash. So people don't really quite understand. But when I came back after I did the rocket car deal, my dad did sponsor the race car that year. I mean, it was a contract and it was $100,000 or whatever. And the next year, my uncle sponsored the aqua slide and dive car. So I mean, I did have help. I mean, they obviously got something out of it in publicity, but it was. But other than those times, I mean, it was. We basically, were on our own.
How scary was that moment for you?
I don't remember it. I remember certain things about it. I don't remember flying through the air for 270 feet, off that embankment and going over the fence and landing in a lake and all that. I remember waking up underwater and couldn't breathe, but by the grace of God, we had the old style masks with filters and not a full face mask like they do now. And so that probably slowed down the intake of water. And I remember my hands floating away because I couldn't get the seatbelt undone because it was the old turnstile and hit button. When underwater, you don't have any pressure. You know, you can't. I couldn't undo it. So, yeah, I remember that part. And then obviously, then I drowned or whatever. I mean, and then Ronnie Guyman, my crew chief, had driven through the fence where the ambulances had stopped at the fence, and he swam underneath and unbuckled it and got me out. And they, whatever you do to bring somebody back out that's drowned, you know, they pumped the water out of me.
Did that make you not even want to come back and race again?
No, because I didn't think any other racetracks had lakes at the end of them.
So. Before that time, did you really take seriously the real dangers of drag racing?
I don't think so. No, no, absolutely not. Because I can just tell you, from then on, as soon as I would get to any racetrack, I would drive to the finish line. I mean, to the end of the racetrack, and look and see, and what's down there. You know, what's my exit strategy, so to speak. You know, and so yeah, I definitely. And a lot of people probably had never until something like that happens, and you start paying attention. Which is why, you know, we have the longest sand trap in history at this racetrack. You know, most racetracks, you know, had a 50-foot sand trap and then a 100-foot. Ours is 700 foot. Ours is an eighth of a mile long, more over an eighth of a mile long. You know, because things can happen anymore at these speeds. So I just want to make sure all the guys are safe.
Now, you stepped away from racing to go pursue land speed racing?
Yeah, after 74, when I was so successful and set the world record at Indy and been, I got picked, or you know, to drive a car that was going to break the sound barrier, and so I took that. I made that decision and part of the contract for me to sign this contract is I had to sell my race team, the race car, and so that was a hard decision to make because I was obviously on top of the world when I did it. You know, I had the quickest runs in history, and so and would have won the U.S. Nationals except in the final round it broke a water line. You know, I smoked the tires, but it would set the record ever run at Indy that year. And so anyway, it was a hard decision to make, but I decided to do it because, you know, back then I wanted to be famous, you know, and thought that would do that. And so I stayed. I had to move to L.A. I lived in Reseda, California for 6 months and Long Beach for 6 months while they built the car, and I did all the fitting for the car, and I did all of the testing for the car, and all the simulator testing and the G-suit testing, and I blacked out a couple times, and I did it all at China Lake at the naval station. And then the guy that I was partners with, his name was Bill Frederick, but he went by William Von Frederick. So that just kind of, and he wore a white coat like a scientist. And he's the guy that used to have the Australian jet car, you know, that ran at racetrack. I mean, smart guy. And so I ended up, the fact that I did read the contract correctly, and it said I had to sell my race team, but it didn't say I couldn't drive a race car, was probably one of the better things that happened. And Gene Snow had back surgery, and so I drove his car just a few months in '75 at the Winter Nationals and the Winter Nationals, IHRA. I drove for about 4 or 5 months, and then I'd having to fly back and forth, and then I drove the Keeling Clayton California Charger on the West Coast that year, and I drove Pluger's and Geiger's funny car that year. So I still got to drive, and I still stayed, you know, I just didn't have my own team. I wasn't running national events other than with snow. And then I decided, you know, this deal's going on too long, so I decided to build my own team again in '76. So I was out 75 and 76. So I really, when I say I raced, I really didn't race this many years. Most people don't realize, because those 2 years I ran one national event in Snow's car, and that was it. And so, unfortunately, my first race back was the Pomona pit crash, where I crashed the car in the pits, and you know, was in a coma for 3 days when the throttle hung open when we were warming it up. And so that was kind of not the greatest start back on your new career. And then I was out for 6 weeks with my collarbone broke and punctured lung. And then and then that's the year I had the fire at Montreal. I still came in third in the points, you know, but it was just kind of a rough start to when you're trying to revamp a career.
What was it like your first fire?
It was hot. Actually, you know, my first fire was the Montreal fire, which was a pretty brutal fire. You know, that I ended up in the burn center in Ann Arbor, Michigan. You know, I didn't stay there very long. Norman Pera at Baton Rouge talked me into leaving the end of that week and driving at the points race, and Deist made me some mittens so I could keep my hands, you know, I had third-degree burns, but instead of having gloves, they made me mitts like you'd have kitchen oven mitts, but that whole story is a total different story. It would take 2 hours to tell, that with Connie Clutta involved flying me there, but I was with Leslie Lovett and Connie Clutta and an airplane with no seats. So, I mean, but at least I did get to the burn center. I've never been so glad to get to a burn center in my life, actually, after the storm we went through. But that was you know, that was a pretty big experience, no question. Shirley Muldowney probably had a lot to do with me saving my fingers, because she's the one that looked at them when I just checked out of the hospital because I couldn't understand the French people. and Jeb Allen's wife came pick me up at the hospital there in Montreal, and I went back, and when Shirley looked at my hands, being that she'd been burned so bad, she gets Connie to come. So Connie gets his twin-engine airplane, lands it on the drag strip in Montreal. NHRA let him do it in between the semi-final round and the final round, and pick me up to fly me to the burn center. Pretty cool story.
It is Billy Meyer out of Waco, Texas, off against Tom the Mongoose McEwen. The word goes out to start the engine. There seems to be some trouble with Billy Meyer's car. The crew's lifting that fiberglass body. They're looking at the engine. I guess everything's okay. The body's coming back down, and Meyer is heading to the starting line.
I saw the movie Wheels of Fire or whatever, and I guess you got burned. I'm thinking you wanted no part of the recreation of the fire, right?
Well, I did all those scenes. Yeah, I mean, I didn't do it was all remote control in that movie. But then me being in the hospital burned was actually, that scene was in Englishtown, New Jersey at the Summer Nationals. We went to a hospital there and did those scenes.
And all of a sudden, Billy's a movie star.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say that. That movie didn't quite ever get going very good. That guy ran out of money, and it took about 10 years for him to get it done.
Billy Meyer, his 18-wheel trailer, a large supply of parts, did not have the problems Paul Smith and the low-budget crew had in getting to this final round. But budgets mean nothing when you reach this point. It's man and machine against each other over a quarter of a mile from a standing start. It's championship drag racing. And Billy Meyer into a wheel stand. Both cars crossed up off the starting line. They recover, and Billy Meyer wins it. Burns some pistons in the process, and something apparently going wrong with Paul Smith's car.
Around the 79 and 1980, you started to bring corporate sponsors into drag racing.
Yeah.
Tell me, was that your approach? Just keep telling them until you got rid of all the no's?
Well, yeah. I mean, in '79, it was the year I got married, and I had lost a sponsor, and so we ran just a few races, but we made a deal with Braniff Airlines and Rio Airways, which was the commuter airline, which now would be American Eagle to American, so it was Rio Airways was the commuter airline to Braniff. And unfortunately, we're getting ready for the 80 season. In January of 80, Braniff filed bankruptcy. And so everything was ready to go and finished, and we're 3 weeks from Pomona, and my sponsor files bankruptcy. And so backing up onto the rocket car deal, after I'd kind of somewhat lost faith in that deal, we had gone and convinced Hal Needham, who was owned a company called Stunts Unlimited in California, and he was the director of all Burt Reynolds movies. And so he buys out Bill Fredericks, and so now Hal and I are partners on the rocket car, and we got to be friends. And so I called Hal and went, "Hey, I got a problem here. I need some help, And I'm smart enough to know in sales that there's certain things that you can do that help somebody to want to do something that may not be relative to what you're trying to accomplish, And so he goes, I know a guy that wants to get in my movies, and he likes racing, and he's been in NASCAR before. You need to go meet with him." So I fly down and meet with a gentleman by the name of Ron Rice. Well, he owns Hawaiian Tropic Suntan Lotion. And I make a deal with them, sponsor the race car. Good money deal. But the truth of the matter is, I got, it's kind of like a business to business. They call it B2B anymore. It's really, they're getting something else out of it. And so I was kind of the first guy that ever did that. And so I get him into the movie. I get him into Hal's movie. So if you look at Stroker Race or whatever, you'll see the Hawaiian Tropic car in there.
The funny car is really a 25-year, $40,000 evolution of the stock car. Mechanically, the engine, the transmission, the differential, identical to that of a top fuel dragster, but that's where the similarities end. With the engine in front of the driver, an onboard fire extinguisher system is required. The exhaust header's much different than that of the fuel dragsters, but the big difference really are the flip-top fiberglass bodies that act as an airfoil pushing downward on the car for more traction, even an escape hatch in case the driver has to make a speedy exit.
So then the next year, at the end of that, in year 80, that's the year I won the IHRA World Championship and came second NHRA one. Hal and Burt Reynolds come to me and they said, we want to go, we want a NASCAR team. And so we want to put together a team because we don't know anything and we won't look like a team, but you just won the World Championship, so we'll make a team thing. And so we ended up doing a deal with Skoal. And so obviously the reason why it's called the Skoal Bandit was because of the Skoal Bandits that they were making. I mean, in Smokey and the Bandit movie. Well, they had made those pouches, but they hadn't named them yet. And that's how they got named the Skoal Bandits, which is the pouches of the skull in Copenhagen. But it was all based on the Smokey and Bandit movie. So I made a lot more money that year because now I got both sponsors. And then the next year, every year I would always try to change sponsors to double the amount we were getting. And knowing I could keep the old one, I've had to. So then we, through Hal, we ended up making that deal with 7-Eleven and Chief Auto Parts. And if you notice, they're in all the movies, in Stroke Race and all those movies. And so it didn't, and if you look at Cannonball Run, you'll see Dom DeLuise running through there getting coffee going, oh, thank heaven for 7-Eleven, you know, on the way on his hauling ass on his Cannonball Run. So, I mean, that business-to-business concept is how we did it.
When you're involved, you don't care about the other run particularly, you're just concentrating on your own. Here, both of them are almost equally important to you.
Very much so, because Tripp's doing an excellent job, and I would like to see it for Hal and for 7-Eleven, and for me and my banker and everybody, us both in the final.
The position that it is right now, running and doing its burnout in the semifinals. Beetle backing up, and Billy Meyer can't back up. He's got problems. If he comes across that center line, and he did, he is out of competition. He's driving the car back up to the starting line. And this is a sight you very rarely see on any drag strip. Two cars coming at each other head on. The Blue Max against Billy Meyer. Meyer coming around him and passing him, heading back behind the starting line area. As Beetle's crew concentrating on their car, they know what happens when you cross the center line. You go out of racing. So it will be a single for Beetle as Billy Meyer, a very unhappy young man, tells his crew that something apparently went wrong with the reverser and he couldn't back up.
So let's see, you're Billy Meyer, funny car driver, Billy Meyer, funny car legend, Billy Meyer, don't give it.
No, I do get it. I mean, that's not the way to say that, I guess. Maybe I cared too much, if that makes sense.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You just don't care who you piss off.
No, because I was trying to accomplish a goal.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Wasn't politically correct would be the better, you know, I didn't really care if I upset the apple cart.
The Columbus thing, you were like the guy, again, that just did whatever. I know you made a burnout, the reverser wouldn't work. So tell me what went through your mind at that moment.
Well, you know, obviously if you're driving a race car, you got to think quick, right? And being a pilot, you got to think quick. And I'd raced in 1 million match races, like a cold call deal, and it's entertainment. So we spun cars out all the time and did burnouts to the finish line. You know, we did all kind of stuff. It'd be like being the Harlem Globetrotters in a sense. When you're on the Coca-Cola Funny Car Cavalcade of Stars, you're entertaining. Well, it didn't work, so I knew how to spin one out. You know, it was easy to do. So I spun it out and drove it back down the start line because I knew it was just the reverser that was broke. The transmission wasn't broke, and it kind of really upset Steve Gibbs. He didn't like that very much.
So exactly what did Steve Gibbs say to you when you got back? Did you try to actually go make the run?
Oh yeah, I went around the guy and pulled back up and staged, and they pulled up from me and made me shut it off. They stood in front of the car. And their quote was, "I crossed the center line." Well, the problem is that's bull because people cross the center lines in burnouts all the time. And at Brainerd, just a few races later, John, the JVC car, he crossed the center line on the burnout, and they didn't cancel him. I mean, I was probably had pissed them off so many times, being so aggressive. You know, I wasn't the one that would get any rules breaks.
How did you deal with that? How did you deal with? Can a man get a break here?
No, I just tried harder. But I mean, at that same year, as an example, Raymond Beadle hit the rail, scraped the rail at Denver, and they didn't kick him out because they said his tire didn't cross the painted line. But the car's wider than the tire, and the body hit the rail at the Mile High Nationals, and they still didn't kick him out. And I lost the world championship by that amount of points.
You Texas guys were pretty tight back in the 70s and 80s, early 80s. So how did it make you feel at the 1981 Winter Nationals when Raymond goes out with a hardtop, comes back a convertible, and then you see all of your friends over there helping him put a roof to come try to beat you?
Well, I was a little upset with Bernstein because he's the one that allowed it to happen. But I'll just show you to Bernstein's credit later. But let me back up real quick. I really didn't have time to think about it because we were blowing up so much crap that weekend. I'd gone to all aluminum motors, all aluminum heads that weekend, Keith Black heads. And it looked like Vietnam in my trailer on Monday morning. I mean, there was not a part, I couldn't have made one more run. We blew up everything we had that weekend. So we were working our ass off for the final round ourselves, and we just didn't have to work on the body. But in Kenny's, obviously it upset me at the time that somebody would let them go cut the roof off the car. But at the 86 U.S. Nationals, I blew a body off in qualifying, and Kenny gave me his spare car body. And if you notice, I made it to the finals there and broke a transmission, but it was the Budweiser car. I mean, everybody may not know it was me, but so Kenny has a big heart. I don't know if it's a big heart for other Texans or for other people, but that's 2 occasions that Kenny actually, let him have his spare body or his spare car.
Billy Meyer on the far lane, on the near lane, it's Mark Oswald. The cars are staged now and they're off. It looks like Meyer might have gotten a little jump, and it looks like Oswald loses his line a little bit. The champion is going to be Meyer. Billy Meyer is the winner. His ET 5.776, 252.10 miles an hour, and you see them coming around the mountain up a slight incline as they roll to a stop and quite a run.
He said, I'm not going to pay these drivers appearance money anymore, so I'm just going to take all that money, put it in a big pot, and we're going to have the Thunder Valley Bristol Spring Nationals, and it's going to be the biggest paycheck. And boy, every year you were picking Carrier's pocket. Tell me about those days of running that race.
Well, I won that race for the first time in 1974, which is the year which was part of why my popularity got so big, why I got picked to do the jet car, and the U.S. Nationals and all that. And I won it by a big margin. And so then in 80, you're talking 1980s when he decided, and he called it the Dash for Cash. And it was 5 times the amount of money of an NHRA national event win. And we get down to the final round, and of course, I don't have much money back then. I've been married 6 months, 7 months, well, I guess almost a year then. And I have Hawaiian Tropic as our sponsor. And I'm racing the other Budweiser car. I forget who the guy's name, Roy Harris. And I go to them and said, y'all want to split the money for the final round? I said, not a chance. Okay, I offered, so I win that race. And that was a third of what I had in my total sponsor money for the year. Come back around the next year, and I'm in the final round again in 81. And offered the same thing. I think it was against Raymond Beadle, actually. And he didn't want to split. I win that race. And I think I lost 1 year, but I won one more time, and I don't know if it was 84. I think it was 84 I won, and maybe lost in 82 in the final. But yeah, that ended up being, I kind of put it in, it was kind of part of my receivables list for the year. I was expecting that money after a while.
What did Carrier say to you when you'd win this thing every year?
Oh, he was a great guy, actually. He was, he loved the publicity, so he liked it.
I would say.
But what I really liked about doing that so well, the Bristol thing, I had this thorn in my side from Bristol because my first race ever on my own that I mentioned to you before I won the manufacturer's race, it rains at Bristol all the time, so you end up running at night. And I was young and, had never raced it track like that where you had to turn at the finish line, so to speak, and it was somewhat dangerous for it, I'm thinking, and I shut off early in the semifinal round by mistake when the dark lights, and Cheryl Greer passed me. Otherwise, I'd have won that race because I'd have definitely won the final round. And so I kind of always wanted to win Bristol after that.
How long did it take for you to fix your relationship with the NHRA?
I don't know that it has ever been fixed. I think I regret a lot of it because as you get older, you realize that a lot of things that certain guys did, I won't name names, I realized how aggressive I was in my life, and I'm still aggressive, but I'm smoother at it than I used to be. It was kind of more of the concept of damn the torpedoes straight ahead, theory of a naval ship officer. But I respect a lot of the guys more than I used to for what they did for the sport, and I probably owe them an apology for the way I treated them. But the newer, obviously, you're going to have a different relationship with newer guys that don't even know who in the hell you are, or because now they just see me as a businessman, not as a guy, leading a boycott of funny cars at a national event or something,
What was your role in that?
Well, I would say that probably myself and Paul Candies and Kenny ran that deal without question. And unfortunately, we did it against the promoter that we actually enjoyed the most, even though it was the worst racetrack. But we had more fun with Norman than anybody. We had a lot of solidarity between Raymond and myself and Candies and Kenny at the time. We were all trying to grow the sport, trying to improve the professional ranks of the sport at the time. We all had a lot of power and a lot of big sponsors, and you hate to have to do something like that, but luckily it's only been done once ever. I usually have had a lot of good time, and I use humor a lot in my life, probably to deflect emotion, I'd say.
Was that an era when you really didn't like the media?
No, I've always gotten along with the media, I think. But they, obviously you don't like to be written bad about, but, which is probably why I hired, my own media company guys, with David Dinsmore and Steve Earwood back in the 80s to kind of do our own press releases and do our own stuff. And I'd done all the NHRA's advanced stuff with Steve Earwood for years and got to respect him and know him and love him. And so that was kind of my offset to the normal media, is for us to combat, maybe like a Donald Trump, combating the media with your own input.
The skyline of Dallas, Texas, rising out of the landscape like an architect's portfolio. 40 miles south of Dallas, the farming community of Ennis has moved into the motorsport spotlight. Starting as a railroad stop in the late 1800s, a 500-acre chunk of prime cornfield near Ennis has been carved into one of the premier racing plants in the country. Funny car racer turned racetrack builder Billy Meyer has created an amphitheater of speed known as the Texas Motorplex.
So you get this idea, I want to be a drag strip owner. And you build the Texas Motorplex, which I would say was probably the first super track since Orange County.
First super track, and I don't know if it was Dallas Motor Speedway, and that was a glorious track for its time. And then you got Orange County. But mine was really simple. Obviously, like I said, I've been raised to think big, and I hate, I knew we were in a big league sport, but we were playing in Little League ballparks. But it'd be like the Dallas Cowboys playing at a high school football field, is what we were doing. I mean, I raced at an IHRA race, we raced in St. Louis, and they didn't even have lights at the finish line, in the shutoff area. They'd put 26 rent cars down there, shine their lights. And me and Mark Oswald would be stupid enough to see who's going to win the Stroh's Night of Fire top fuel money, you know. I mean, things like that. It's like dumb. But what convinced me to do it was when I was sponsored by school, and Lou Bantle and his wife. Lou Bantle was the chairman of the board of school, U.S. Tobacco. I put together this team and everything. I go to Daytona with Bert and Hal for the first race ever. We're there at Daytona, and we're in the suites, and they got caviar, and they got champagne, and they got, all Chateaubriand. I mean, they got all this fancy stuff. So they decided they wanted to come to a drag race. So they come to the Summer Nationals, July 1st in Englishtown, New Jersey. They fly in their Gulfstream 3. Probably had caviar and champagne on the plane. They come to, and there's not a bathroom at outhouses only at the time, 1981. There's no suites. They didn't have suites at Englishtown. It's 104 degrees. And by the grace of God, Gary Beck and I used to park side by side, because my trailer back then, I worked out the left side. Everybody else worked out the right side. So, and Gary and I, we were kind of probably one of the first, almost what you'd call team cars of anybody. We shared more information than anybody, even though he was a top fuel car and I was a funny car. And he had built a new semi-trailer that year, and it had a lounge in the front and a bathroom. So at least Lou Bandle's wife, who's had a cane and was in her 60s, could get up these stairs and go to a bathroom instead of an outhouse. But after that, they basically just blew us off. They just, even though it was good for their product sales, they didn't want to be involved. And I lost that sponsorship. And I've never lost a sponsor. And, I mean, that was the first sponsor I ever lost in my life. Now, granted, it didn't help that Winston treated us like hell that year, because at the first race of the year, when I pulled in, they didn't know I had that car. And NHRA actually told me I wasn't going to get points that year. I wasn't going to be able to get Winston drag racing points and our money. And of course I said, oh, fine, I'll make more money in court. I don't care. You can't stop me from having a competitor's deal. And still, good Lord works in mysterious ways. I end up winning the first race, in the scorecard. And they have to eat their words because they don't know what to do. And that was pretty funny, seeing if they trying to ask me with Burt Reynolds in the winner circle, seeing we're going to put Winston hats on, take our skull hats off. So that didn't work. And so when I built this, I specifically went to Texas Stadium and I counted all the bathrooms there. And I put one more bathroom in this place than Texas Stadium had, which was 76 bathrooms at the time. And I just, because I wanted to be able to say to the news that we had more bathrooms than Texas Stadium had. So that was why I did it. I needed a better experience for the sponsor. Damn sure needed a better experience for the racer, better racetracks and safer racetracks, and needed a whole lot better experience for the spectator. I mean, spectator's the one going in those outhouses.
Texas Motorplex features the first ever all-concrete quarter-mile built specifically for racing purposes. Why concrete? Well, this surface is smoother than a baby's behind, far smoother than even the finest of asphalt compounds. Now, even a few years ago, a concrete quarter-mile wasn't a practical situation because you had to have expansion joints every 30 or 40 feet. That would have made the track much too rough to race on. But this was built with what they call post-tension. Beneath the surface in both lanes, there are 3 giant cables that are stretched over 30,000 pounds of tension, and that is supposed to hold the whole thing together.
And the concrete quarter mile was way ahead of its deal, right?
Well, absolutely, and especially the post-tension, where there's no seams. Runways have all concrete, but they have a seam every 50 feet, for the expansion, and this is all post-tension, so it's all compressed together, which nobody ever, it's the longest single pour in the history of post-tension at the time. And again, by the grace of God, the company VSL that made all the cables and everything, it was a Dallas company, and they had just done an experiment on Interstate 35, trying to think about using post-tension for highways, and so we made a deal with them to do this, and it was and it's 35 years old and still there.
The NHRA told you built the track all wrong.
For probably at least 12 years after I did it, but probably until Steve Gibbs left. They just didn't, and it was just hard. It was. They didn't understand how to prep it at the time because it was the only one, and they're only here once a year. And so we prepped it the first half a dozen years, but they would usually incorrectly clean it up, because oil doesn't soak into concrete, it does into asphalt. So it was easier to clean up asphalt because you're only cleaning up 50% of it. That's why you'd end up with one good lane, one bad lane by the weekend. And this one just takes longer to clean up because you got to clean it all up, and so you have to use a different method. So cleaning solution, more like cleaning a shop floor is what the best way to describe it. And so, yeah, but I remember when I started drag racing, it was asphalt everywhere, and then somebody put in a 5-foot concrete starting pad, and then somebody put in a 20-foot one, and then somebody put in a 100-foot one, and then somebody put in a 200-foot one. And I think maybe they were up to maybe 300 feet by the time I did this. Like, well, the car runs better all the way to the asphalt. So it's like, duh, it's not brain surgery. And it was more money than asphalt, but from a capital expense, it's been a whole lot less money than asphalt. I mean, Houston's probably repaid 5 times since they built, and they built a year after I did. And all I've done is grind it once. So it was probably the best investment I ever made in my life, didn't know it.
What we've seen here is 5 new world records and the beginning of a new era in IHRA championship drag racing, where the keynotes are professionalism and great racing action. The records are these: the largest crowd in the history of the drag race. Top fuel elapsed time, 5.196 seconds. Top fuel mile per hour, 278.63. Funny car elapsed time, 5.403. Top alcohol funny car, top speed, 227.27. Pro stock elapsed time, 7.365. Pat?
The big winners again were the fans here in Darlington, and of course Billy Meyer's initial move with the IHRA.
Obviously, one of my close friends was T. Wayne Roberts, right, from Robertson at Winston. He started out as a show car driver, ends up being president of Winston Motorsports. Well, he and I always wanted to grow the sport, which is why I built the Motorplex, right? I'd already built the Motorplex, and he knew how much I loved the sport, and he wanted to merge the two sanctioning bodies, and he knew you couldn't do that with NHRA and IHRA. I mean, it's like cats and dogs fighting. So we came up with this plan, this theoretically ingenious plan, and so I went on the sly and bought IHRA. Nobody knew I was doing it. My crew didn't know I was doing it. Nobody knew I was doing it. And it was towards the end of '87, right, the week before, I think, the World Finals, and because he knew that NHRA was bigger than IHRA, and he wanted, because Winston was so big in NASCAR in the Southeast, he wanted drag racing to shine in the Southeast, and so he wanted Darlington and Rockingham and Bristol to be on the to be on the big tour. Even though IHRA signed the Winston World Championship before NHRA did. Carrier's the one that sold Winston to get into drag racing. And so anyway, obviously the whole concept blew up after I did it, and they misunderstood what we were trying to accomplish. And so we ended up, enemies. And so I went and ran IHRA. And I had no intention of doing it originally. I thought we were going to put together this big, glamorous package and do that.
Top Fuel qualifying became a magical moment in drag racing history. On your left, Gene Snow. On the right, Texan.
Eddie Hill. A great crowd of fans were on their feet hoping to see the first sub-5-second run. They weren't disappointed. Eddie Hill became the first man to beat the 5-second mark. 4:99, 288.55 miles per hour. Eddie Hill had done what no one else in drag racing history had ever done before.
No amount of positive energy that could have put a positive spin on that IHRA experience for you, was there?
Well, a drought would have helped. We got rained out at 8 of 12 races, and rain at 10 of the 12. Other than that, I think it would have been pretty fun.
Do you know what the IHRA stood for that year?
It has rained again. Yes, I damn sure do.
So you ever just look up and say, God, can I get a break here? Just one?
I know the farmers loved it when I came into town. I mean, it was pretty brutal.
Hi, everybody. This is John Lundberg at Milan Dragway, Milan, Michigan, for the 14th running of the Motorcraft Northern Nationals. We're also in a great drought of 1988. It's been 102 degrees here. It's changed the whole dynamics of the way guys are setting up cars to run at this event, and believe me, they're being sorely tested. And here to talk more about what's gone on in the preparation for this 1988 Motorcraft Northern Nationals is my partner, Brett Kepner. Brett?
Well, John, as you said, the drought and the temperatures have played a key role in qualifying here, but an early morning rainstorm is going to cool things off during eliminations.
The cool thing was to see the following I had and the belief I had of all the other racers, you know, that believed in what we were wanting to accomplish and make it a bigger sport. And they saw what I had done with my race teams and the semi-trailers and then the Motorplex, and they believed in what I was trying to accomplish. And so I had a lot of guys that went way beyond what they needed to do to follow us, you know, all the pro teams.
On paper, the whole concept of the IHRA under the Billy Ball plan should have worked. I mean, but would you say that maybe you just didn't understand the sportsman racer enough?
Oh, I definitely missed the sportsman racer totally. That was the biggest failure of the whole. I mean, other than me losing millions of dollars because of the rainouts, the sportsman deal I got totally wrong. I missed that. I mean, that's the absolute mistake I made. It wouldn't have changed the financials of the sport. I mean, because that wouldn't have changed how much we lost, you know, because all the money's going to the pros at the national events, and when no spectators come because it rains out, you know, you're still going to lose that money. But it definitely lost the support of all the sportsmen, but I also had looked back in history of the IHRA entries versus NHRA entries, and it was a joke in comparison. You know, they'd have 17 super stockers versus NHRA having 75, or, you know, or whatever. I mean, it was, and that's when I thought the bracket concept would work, because it was a lesser income community in the Southeast where a lot of those races were. Now, what I didn't think about was the fact that I grew the sport in a matter of 6 months or 6 weeks, signing national events in New Jersey and, you know, and Florida and more affluent areas, and so doing the bracket racing thing, and now it's comical to show how you can change in life. I would now say, you know, we don't even. I think bracket racing has destroyed our sport in the sportsman category, but yet, on the other hand, I'm the dumbass that did it. You know, I mean, at 7, 98, 99, 90, 10, 9 class. So if I could do it all over again, you know, and of course, you learn from mistakes, and then you learn from seeing things like Pink's All Out, you know, and Street Outlaws, and all the things they've done, and the concept of run what you brung and hope you brung enough is the way we all grew up, you know, and instead of throttle stops. And so, Yeah, that's, other than the rain, that's my biggest regret. Actually, my biggest regret is that NHRA didn't believe me, and they thought I was trying to take over the sport. They didn't believe that I actually did it for the betterment of the sport, trying to merge everything together. You learn from your mistakes in life, and if you don't learn from your mistakes, you're a dumbass.
Well, what did your dad mean to you?
He meant everything. I mean, the same as your dad, or same as most people's dad. I mean, obviously some people have dads that mean the wrong thing to them, but I had a great relationship with my mom and my dad. And my dad was hell-bent on, I mean, he was, you think I have been motivated, and you think I've been, he was still working the week he died. I mean, he finished his last book about 4 days before he died, which was one of the Chicken Soup for Your Soul books.
What's Chicken Soup for Billy Meyer's soul?
Well, I mean, I'm having a great time now. My daughter now is president of the company here at the racetrack. She works with her general manager, Andy, who runs the place daily. And so that's fun working with your daughter. My son bought one of my other companies about 5 years ago, and is very successful. I got 6 grandkids. Got a great wife, 42 years. Great.
Who was your hero back then?
I've never had a hero. So, not in any sport. Which is one of the reasons I have always been somewhat shy about signing autographs, because I didn't quite understand the concept of why would somebody want my autograph, or because I don't want anybody else's autograph. So I haven't never had a drag racing hero, or any kind of hero.
Was that the ego part, or was that just?
No, I just think that's me. I think that's the opposite of that. I think that's me just thinking we're all the same.
Do you have a personal favorite saying?
No, not really. Obviously, yeah.
Is everything okay?
Yeah, I just get emotional.
That's okay. There's a saying behind you. Would you read that?
I don't need to read it.
Can you tell me?
Yeah, sure.
Whatever you vividly imagine,
Ardently desire.
Sincerely believe in and enthusiastically act upon must inevitably come to pass.
What does that mean to you?
It means that my father, he wrote it, and that's the way he raised me and my 2 brothers. In other words, dream big, and don't give mental recognition to the possibility of defeat. Kind of the saying I said before, damn the torpedo, straight ahead.
And that's the way you lived your life and raced your career.
Living my life, not lived my life. Don't cut me off yet.
It's so awesome, man.
Yeah.
Billy's probably one of the hardest chargers I've ever met in my life. He's got more going for him than any racer I've ever met. He's got dedication, he's got drive. Nothing has stopped him. He suffered 2 crashes last year. He was racing within weeks.
I mean, it's a good thing he wasn't a prize fighter, because he would keep getting up after he was out.
I think, I know it sounds funny, but I'm going to be remembered for whatever people think of me. I don't know what people think. It doesn't matter what, I'm not trying to, if I was trying to be remembered as something, I'd have probably tried harder at certain things to be remembered as something. I think I just enjoyed what I've done.
into this race with the choice of lanes by just a few hundredths of a second. It's a good start. Instantly up in smoke goes McCulloch. And look at Meyer streak to the finish line. 5.47 seconds, continuing the performance dominance that Billy Meyer has enjoyed throughout eliminations.
Nobody's done what I've done in the sport. Nobody's been a track owner, a sanctioned body owner, a magazine owner, a TV production owner, a drag racer, a tuner. You know, I mean, I can have enough knowledge to get in any conversation about anything, you know, but I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the way you want to be remembered. Well, you know, I didn't ever really think I had a big ego, but when you look back at that, and obviously, I don't know if it was an ego as much as just thought I was the best there was. And I don't know if you call that ego or just that much determination and that much belief in yourself. So ego and determination are two different things. So looking back on it, it's hard to tell, but most people thought it was ego. Let's put it that way. No question.
You were just being Billy Meyer.
Yeah, no question. Yeah, I was just being kind of how I was raised. I mean, just go, you know, go win.